What you are about to hear is a story that rocked the cruise industry to its core. It's a story about a 17-year-old boy, a penthouse suite ticket, and a pair of handcuffs. It all began at the bustling cruise terminal of Port Everglades, at the boarding gate for Azure Horizon Cruises ship bound for the Caribbean. But this isn't just about a mistake. This is about a deep-seated prejudice that led to the public humiliation of a young black teenager. The world watched, cameras rolled, and a company was brought to its knees, all before they realized the boy they had just accused of being a criminal was the son of their own CEO. Stay tuned as we uncover the shocking twists, the corporate conspiracy, and the brutal real-life karma that followed. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. The air in Port Everglades Terminal 4 hummed with a unique kind of organized chaos. It was the sound of 1,000 journeys beginning and ending at once. The rhythmic clatter of rolling suitcases, the distant garbled announcements of ship changes, and the murmur of a dozen different languages blending into a single ambient drone. At Gate B24, the Caribbean-bound Azure Horizon Cruises ship was preparing for boarding, and the usual class system of sea travel was on full display. The sleek silver stanchions separated the milling crowd of standard stateroom passengers from the small, exclusive queue for Priority Group 1. 17-year-old Liam Walker sat quietly in one of the designated suite passenger seats near the window. His attention was split between the massive cruise ship named the Meridian, being serviced at the dock, and the advanced calculus textbook open on his lap. He was a tall, lanky kid with a thoughtful expression that made him seem older than his years. He wore what any comfortable teenager would for a long voyage, a simple bright blue hoodie from his high school's robotics club, a pair of dark wash jeans, and a set of expensive-looking Bose noise-canceling headphones resting around his neck. For him, this was just a routine trip. His father, David Walker, was based in Miami, while his mother, a prominent art historian, was curating a new exhibit in Paris. He spent school holidays shuttling between the two. This was a life he'd known since he was a boy. Traveling in a suite wasn't a luxury he flaunted. It was simply the logistics of his family's life, a privilege he understood, but didn't define himself by. He was more interested in the ship's bow hydrodynamics than the champagne service. His quiet focus was interrupted by a sharp, saccharine voice. "Excuse me, sir. This seating area is for Group 1 passengers only." Liam looked up. The voice belonged to the boarding agent, a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Susan Price. Her smile was a tight, practiced crescent that didn't reach her eyes. Her gaze flickered from Liam's hoodie to his ticket, which lay face up on the seat beside him. The bold penthouse printed on it was unmistakable. "Oh, hi. Yes, I'm in Suite 1201, Liam replied politely, gesturing to the ticket. Susan's smile tightened further. "I see that, but I'll need to verify it. Can I see your boarding documents and your ID, please?" It was an odd request. They hadn't even started pre-boarding. But Liam, accustomed to the arbitrary rules of travel, simply nodded and handed over his phone with a digital pass and his driver's license. Susan Price took the items, and her eyes narrowed as she scanned them. She was a 15-year veteran of Azure Horizon, a woman who prided herself on her ability to spot trouble. In her mind, trouble came in many forms: fraudulent flyers, sea poachers, and people who didn't fit the profile. This kid, in his casual clothes, sitting alone in the suite section, set off every alarm bell in her head. He didn't look like the typical occupant of Suite 1201. He didn't have the leather briefcase, the tailored suit, or the air of entitled authority. He was just a kid, a black kid in a hoodie. She tapped at her console, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. "It's just that we've had a recent spike in fraudulent upgrades and credit card scams," she said loudly, her voice carrying to the other passengers now beginning to gather. "It's a very sophisticated system. People buy standard stateroom tickets and then use stolen information to upgrade themselves into our premium suites." Liam felt a prickle of unease. Her explanation was directed at him but spoken for the benefit of the audience around them. A few people in the standard line were now openly staring. He could feel their eyes on him, the silent judgment beginning to form. "I can assure you, my ticket is valid," Liam said, keeping his voice steady. "My father booked it, and your father is?" asked Susan, her tone dripping with skepticism. David Walker, the name meant nothing to her. It was just a name. She handed his phone and ID back with a dismissive flick of her wrist. The system is being a bit slow to verify your payment method. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside for a moment, sir. We can't have you board until this is cleared up. Step aside to where? Liam asked, confused. The boarding process hadn't even started. Just over there, she said, gesturing vaguely toward a barren stretch of wall away from the podium and the priority lane. Away from the boarding area. We will call you if and when we can clear your suite. The humiliation was a hot flush that crept up his neck. She was banishing him, segregating him in front of everyone, branding him as a potential criminal. He was no longer a passenger in 1201. He was a problem to be isolated. He stood his ground, his politeness hardening into a quiet resolve. With all due respect, my ticket is confirmed. My suite is assigned, and I am in the correct seating area. I prefer to wait here. Susan's painted-on smile finally vanished, replaced by a mask of stern authority. Sir, you are failing to comply with the instructions of a cruise line official. This ticket, she held up a printout she just made from her computer, waving it as if it were evidence, is flagged for a potential payment mismatch. Until our central office can verify the Platinum Elite MX card used to purchase it, you are not a confirmed passenger. Now, either you step aside or I will be forced to call port security. The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Liam looked at the faces around him. Some were sympathetic, others annoyed, but most were just blankly curious. Watching the free drama unfold, he knew he had two choices: accept the humiliation and step aside, or stand up for himself and risk an escalation he couldn't control. He thought of his father, a man who had taught him to always carry himself with dignity, to never shrink, and to meet ignorance with intelligence. I don't think that will be necessary, Liam said, his voice low but clear. I'm sure if you just run the check again, you'll see everything is in order. For Susan Price, this was the final straw. This wasn't just a kid who didn't belong. This was a kid who was arguing back, challenging her authority in front of a gate full of passengers. She saw it as a brazen act of defiance. She reached for the phone on her desk without breaking eye contact. Yes, this is Susan Price at Gate B24. I need Port Authority assistance. I have a passenger here with a fraudulent ticket who is refusing to comply. Yes, potentially aggressive. Liam's heart sank. Aggressive. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved a muscle. But he knew in that sickening moment that the story was no longer his to write. She had created a narrative and he was now the villain in it. The wheels of something terrible had been set in motion, and he was standing right in their path. The arrival of Port Authority Police Department officers shifted the entire dynamic of the gate area. The ambient hum of the terminal seemed to fade, replaced by a focused, tense silence. Passengers, who had been pretending not to watch, were now openly gawking, their phones held low, discreetly recording. The officers, a stern-faced man named Brian and his younger, more watchful partner, approached the podium where Susan Price stood, now projecting an air of a victim who had been forced to take drastic measures. What's the situation here, ma'am? Officer Brian asked, his voice a calm, authoritative rumble that cut through the tension. This young man, Susan began, pointing at Liam as if he were an exhibit, is holding a suite ticket purchase with a flag credit card. I've asked him to step aside while we verify it, but he's become defiant and refused to comply with my instructions. I'm concerned for the safety and security of the boarding process. The lie was so blatant, so audacious that Liam felt a surge of disbelief. Defiant, concerned for safety? He had been nothing but polite. That's not true, Liam said, speaking directly to the officer. My ticket is valid. The agent hasn't been able to verify it for some reason, and I simply said I would prefer to wait in my designated seat. Officer Brian turned his gaze on Liam. It was a practiced, assessing look, one that had sized up thousands of people in thousands of situations. What he saw was a teenager in a hoodie. His training, his experience, and his unconscious biases all converged on a single unfortunate conclusion. The uniformed cruise line official was a more credible party, son. You need to listen to the ship staff, Officer Brian said, his tone shifting from inquisitive to commanding. This is her area. If she tells you to move, you move. It's that simple. Let's not make this a bigger issue than it needs to be. But I haven't done anything wrong, Liam insisted, his voice pleading now. She is making an assumption about me because of how I'm dressed. The mention of profiling seemed to irritate the officer. Nobody is assuming anything. This is about a flag ticket, son. Now, I'm not going to ask you again. Step away from the podium. Liam felt trapped. Every word he spoke was being twisted, used as further evidence of his non-compliance. He looked past the officer at the sea of faces watching him. He saw a woman shaking her head in pity, a businessman rolling his eyes in annoyance, a young couple filming with their phone. He was a spectacle, a cautionary tale. This is what happens when you don't know your place. He took a deep breath, trying to channel his father's calm. Officer, I understand you have a job to do. Could you please just ask her to show you the proof that the ticket is fraudulent? Is there an official alert on her screen? It was a logical question, a fair request. But to Susan Price, it was another challenge. Before the officer could even respond, she interjected, "He's still arguing. I told you he's being aggressive. He's trying to talk his way out of it." That was a trigger word, aggressive. Officer Bryan's posture stiffened. His partner subtly moved to flank Liam, the space around him, once a sprawling terminal, had shrunk to a few feet of charged, hostile territory. "All right, that's enough," Officer Bryan said, his voice now devoid of any patience. "You're causing a disturbance. Put your hands behind your back." Liam's blood ran cold. "What? Why? I haven't done anything. You're interfering with port operations. We're going to detain you until we can figure out who you are and what you're doing here." Before he could process the command, his arms were pulled firmly behind his back. The cold metallic click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed in the silent gate area. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. The humiliation was absolute. It was a physical weight pressing down on his chest, stealing his breath. He was 17 years old, an honor student, a member of the debate team, on his way to see his mother for the holidays, and he was being handcuffed in the middle of Port Everglades. Because the boarding agent didn't like his hoodie, he was paraded past a line of now silent passengers, his face burning with shame. They walked into a small, gray, featureless room just off the gangway. It smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. "Empty your pockets on the table," Officer Bryan commanded. Liam did as he was told. His wallet, his phone, a pack of gum, his room key for the Paris flat. The officer picked up the wallet, flipping it open. He pulled out the black American Express card. On the front, embossed in silver letters, were the words, "David Walker, this isn't your card." The officer stated flatly, "It's my father's card," Liam said, his voice cracking slightly. "I'm an authorized user. You can see my name is on the back." The officer didn't bother to look. "And I'm sure your father has no idea you've taken his card on a little joyride to the Caribbean." "That's not what happened," Liam said, his frustration boiling over into anger. "You're not listening to me." "No one is listening to me. You can make one phone call," the officer said, gesturing to Liam's phone. "Call your father. Let's see what he has to say about this." Liam stared at the phone. This was his one chance. His father was a busy man. He was likely in a meeting, possibly with people who sailed on the very ships his company operated. An interruption would be unwelcome. But the situation was desperate. He knew he couldn't just have his dad talk to the officer. That wouldn't be enough. He needed to get through to someone who understood the system, someone who could dismantle this nightmare from the inside out. He recited the number from memory. It wasn't his dad's main line. It was the direct private line to his executive assistant, a woman named Maria, who had been with his father for 2 decades and could move mountains with a single phone call. The officer dialed the number and put the phone on speaker. It rang once, twice. Liam held his breath. "David Walker's office. This is Maria speaking." Her voice was crisp, professional, and blessedly familiar. "My name is Liam Walker," he said, trying to keep his voice from shaking. "Maria, I need to speak to my dad. It's an emergency." There was a slight pause. Maria could hear the sterile acoustics of the room, the tension in his voice. "Liam, what's wrong?" "Where are you?" "I'm at Port Everglades. Gate B24. They think I stole my ticket. They've handcuffed me." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. It stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. Then Maria's voice returned, but it was completely different. The professional warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp efficiency that Liam had only heard her use in true crisis. "Stay exactly where you are, Liam. Don't say another word to them. I'm getting your father." The line went quiet. Officer Bryant looked at his partner with a smirk. "Putting on a good show, kid. I'll give you that." But Liam wasn't listening. He was looking at the speakerphone, praying. He knew what was about to happen. A storm was gathering far away in a Miami skyscraper, and it was about to break right over their heads. The boardroom on the 50th floor of the Azure Horizon Tower in Miami was a world away from the grubby detention room at Port Everglades. It was a sanctuary of polished mahogany, floor-to-ceiling glass, and hushed, reverent tones. David Walker, CEO of Azure Horizon Cruises, sat at the head of the massive table, listening intently as his chief operating officer, Thomas Vance, presented the quarterly performance metrics. David was a man who commanded respect effortlessly. Tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, he possessed a quiet intensity that could be far more intimidating than any outburst. He had built Azure Horizon from a struggling domestic carrier into a global powerhouse, through a combination of ruthless efficiency and an almost fanatical devotion to the customer experience. His motto, plastered in break rooms and training manuals across the company, was simple: every guest is our priority. Every detail matters. He was mid-sentence, questioning a figure on fuel cost hedging, when the solid oak door of the boardroom opened silently. It was Maria, his executive assistant. She never, ever interrupted board meetings. The dozen executives around the table fell silent, sensing the gravity of the breach in protocol. Maria walked directly to David and placed his private cell phone on the table in front of him. "Sir," she said, her voice low but firm, "you need to take this." "It's Liam." David's focus snapped from the quarterly report to the phone. Liam knew never to call this line unless the world was ending. He picked it up, his expression unreadable. "What is it?" Maria had patched the call through. The voice on the other end was that of a Port Authority officer. "Mr. Walker, this is Officer Bryant at Port Everglades. We have a minor in custody here who claims to be your son, Liam Walker. He was trying to board a cruise to the Caribbean using a suite ticket purchased with your credit card." The temperature in the boardroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. David's posture didn't change, but a dangerous stillness settled over him. "He's my son, and I personally booked that ticket for him this morning. Put him on the phone." There was a fumbling sound. "Dad?" Liam's voice was strained, thick with a mixture of fear and relief. "Liam, are you okay?" "Tell me exactly what happened," David said, his voice a low, controlled calm. "They wouldn't let me board. The gate agent, a woman named Susan, said the ticket was fraudulent. I tried to explain, but she called security. Dad, they handcuffed me." In front of everyone, the word handcuff landed in the silent boardroom like a grenade. The executives exchanged nervous glances. Thomas Vance, the coup, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. David Walker closed his eyes for a single long second. In that second, the CEO vanished, replaced by a father. He pictured his son, a good kid who loved science and hated confrontation, being publicly shamed and restrained like a common criminal. A cold, surgical rage, more potent than any hot-tempered outburst, settled deep in his chest. When he opened his eyes, he was a CEO again, but with a new, terrifying focus. "Liam, listen to me," he said, his voice now like chips of ice. "Give the phone back to the officer." There was another shuffle. "Officer Bryant, here, Officer Bryant," David began, his tone polite but edged with steel. "You have made a catastrophic mistake. You are currently illegally detaining the son of the chief executive officer of this cruise line. I want you to take those handcuffs off my son right now." The officer was taken aback by the sheer force of authority in the voice. "Sir, with all due respect, we were following protocol based on the information provided by the cruise line's agent." "I do not care about your protocol," David cut in, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing. "The next person you will be speaking to is the chief of the Port Authority Police, and my corporate legal counsel if those cuffs are not off him in the next 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, a frantic scrambling sound came through the phone. Okay, they're off. He's fine now." Put Susan, the boarding agent, on the phone. There was a hesitant pause. Then Susan Price's shaky voice. "Hello." David didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Miss Price, what is your employee ID number?" "It's 7 for J9 now 1, she stammered. "Thank you. Stay exactly where you are. Do not leave the gate. Do not talk to anyone. Await instructions." He clicked the phone off without another word and placed it on the table. The boardroom was utterly silent. David stood up and looked at his executive team. Thomas, he said, his eyes locking onto his coup. Get me the Port Everglades terminal manager on a conference line. Now. Jennifer Chen. Get me her file. He snapped at the head of HR. Mark, he said to his chief legal officer. Start drafting the official complaint to the Port Authority for unlawful detention of a minor, and get our PR team ready. We're about to have a 5-alarm fire. He walked over to the window, looking out over the Miami skyline, but seeing none of it. He was seeing the face of his son, humiliated. He was seeing a failure not just of one employee, but of the entire system he had built. The culture he had tried to instill. The motto, every guest is our priority, mocked him. Down at Gate B24, the world had been turned upside down. A frantic, panting woman in a senior manager's uniform, the terminal manager, Jennifer Chen, had sprinted to the gate, her face pale with terror. What happened here? What did you do? She hissed at Susan, having just been read the riot act over the phone by a furious Q. I was just following procedure. For a flag ticket, Susan defended herself, though her voice trembled. A flag ticket? Susan, that was David Walker's personal Centurion card. The system didn't flag it. It probably just couldn't process a transaction that large that quickly. And you handcuffed his son. Officer Bryant and his partner stood by awkwardly, realizing they had stepped on a corporate landmine of epic proportions. The passengers, who had been told there was a security delay, were watching the panicked exchange. Putting the pieces together, the story was starting to ripple through the crowd. Jennifer Chen rushed into the small room where Liam was rubbing his rarest. Mr. Walker, she said, her voice breathless and sycophantic. Liam, I am so sorry. This is a terrible misunderstanding. Please, come with me. We'll get you settled in our flagship lounge. Can we get you anything? Food, a drink? Liam just looked at her, his eyes cold. The sudden shift from being treated like a criminal to being treated like a king was more disorienting than the initial accusation. He said nothing. He just followed her out of the room, walking past a shell-shocked Susan Price, who now looked as if she'd seen a ghost. As he walked into the main terminal, his phone buzzed. It was a text from his dad. I'm on my way. Don't move. We are going to fix this. Liam knew his cruise to the Caribbean was the last thing on anyone's mind now. The incident was over, but the fallout was just beginning. And from the look in the terminal manager's eyes and the tone of his father's voice, he knew it was going to be a storm unlike any Azure Horizon had ever seen. The Azure Horizon flagship lounge at Port Everglades was an oasis of tranquility, designed to insulate its most valued customers from the chaos of the terminal. Soft jazz played through hidden speakers. Waiters in crisp uniforms offered champagne and hors d'oeuvres, and the seating was plush leather and polished chrome. But for Liam, sitting in a secluded corner booth, the luxury felt like a mockery. Less than an hour ago, he was in handcuffs. Now he was being offered artisanal cheeses. The whiplash was nauseating. David Walker arrived 40 minutes later, moving through the lounge like a thundercloud in a bespoke suit. He bypassed the greetings of the lounge staff and went straight to his son. He sat down opposite Liam, his face etched with a mixture of fury and deep concern. Are you okay? He asked, his voice softer than Liam had heard it all day. Liam just nodded, unable to find the words. They had no right, David said, his jaw tight. No right. He reached across the table and put a hand on his son's shoulder. This isn't your fault. You did nothing wrong. I need you to know that. I know, Liam said quietly. But Dad, the way she looked at me, the way everyone looked at me. They saw my clothes and they saw a thief. That's all they saw. The simple, painful truth of that statement hung in the air between them. For all of David Walker's power, for all his wealth and influence, he could not build a shield strong enough to protect his son from the ugliness of a split-second judgment based on the color of his skin. I am going to tear this company apart until I find out why this happened, David vowed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. This isn't one bad employee, Liam. This is a symptom of a sickness. And I am going to find the source of the poison. As David and Liam sat in the lounge, the gears of the corporate machine were grinding furiously. In an emergency conference call, a terrified Susan Price was being questioned by a team from HR and legal. She was hysterical, repeating that she was only following a new directive, What directive? The head of legal, Mark Johnson, demanded. The Premium Suite Integrity Initiative, she cried. It came down from regional management last month. We were told to be extra vigilant. We were told to look for atypical passengers in the premium suites. Passengers whose appearance doesn't match the expected demographic. We were encouraged to challenge them, to verify payment methods on the spot. They said it was to protect revenue. Mark Johnson's blood ran cold. Atypical passengers doesn't match the expected demographic. It was corporate doublespeak for racial profiling. Gift wrapped in the language of revenue protection. Who signed off on this directive, Susan? He asked. Our regional manager, Michael Russo, she said. But the pressure came from higher up, from the COO's office. The name landed like a bomb. The coup. Thomas Vance. Back in the Miami Tower, Thomas Vance was in his own office, pacing like a caged animal. He had been on the board meeting call. He had heard the cold fury in David's voice. This was not how this was supposed to happen. Thomas was a man who had been perpetually in David's shadow. He was ambitious, cunning, and deeply resentful of David's golden boy reputation. For the past year, he had been quietly waging a war of 1,000 cuts against his boss. His strategy was simple: implement policies under the guise of fiscal responsibility that would subtly degrade the customer experience, create friction points, and lead to PR nightmares. He knew the board was getting restless with David's expensive customer-first approach. A few high-profile scandals, a dip in the stock price, and Thomas, the sensible numbers guy, could make his move for the top job. The Premium Suite Integrity Initiative was his masterpiece. It was designed to create exactly this kind of incident. He had envisioned an irate tech blogger or a minor celebrity getting hassled, leading to a nasty Twitter storm that would make David look out of touch. He had never in his wildest nightmares imagined the policy would be used on David Walker's own son. His carefully laid trap had snapped shut on the one person it was never meant to catch. His phone buzzed. It was Michael Russo, the East Coast regional manager, the man he had personally tasked with pushing the new policy. Thomas, we have a massive problem, Russo said, his voice panicked. The Port Everglades incident. They're tracing the directive back to me. To us, you will keep my name out of this, Michael, Thomas hissed into the phone. You are the regional manager. You are responsible for the implementation and training of your staff. This price agent was overzealous. She misinterpreted a simple revenue protection policy. She's a lone wolf, a bad apple. That is the story. Do you understand me? But she was doing what we encouraged her to do, Russo protested. She handcuffed the CEO's son. Vance roared. There was no defense for that. You will cut her loose. You will claim she acted alone, and you will contain this. This is your mess to clean up. He hung up the phone, his heart pounding. He had to get ahead of this. He had to frame the narrative before David did. He immediately called the chairman of the board, a man named Robert Harrison. Robert, Thomas here. I'm afraid we've had a deeply unfortunate incident at Port Everglades, he began, his voice oozing with false concern. It involves David's son. It seems a rogue agent became incredibly overzealous and, well, it's a terrible look. I'm managing the situation now. But frankly, Robert, this is what I've been worried about. David's focus on these lofty brand ideals has left the operational side of the business weak. The staff is poorly trained. This kind of thing was bound to happen. He was planting the seed. This wasn't a policy problem. It was a leadership problem. David's leadership problem. But David Walker was already 2 steps ahead. As he sat with Liam, his phone had been buzzing with updates from his own loyal team. He just received the email from Mark Johnson summarizing Susan Price's testimony. It mentioned the directive. It mentioned Michael Russo. And it mentioned the COO's office. He looked at his son, whose face was still pale with shock. The gears were turning in his mind. This wasn't just a random act of prejudice. It wasn't just a bad policy. It was a pattern. He thought of the uptick in complaints from minority passengers over the last 6 months. Data Thomas had dismissed as statistical noise. He thought of other small, inexplicable PR disasters, a baggage fiasco in Atlanta, a catering failure in Dallas, all in hubs managed by people loyal to Thomas. It clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This was deliberate. Thomas had been poisoning the wells, hoping to make him look incompetent. The incident with Liam wasn't the plan. but it was the result of the system Thomas had built. He had weaponized bigotry and incompetence for corporate gain. "We're not going to the Caribbean tonight, son," David said, his eyes now blazing with a cold fire. He stood up, pulling out his phone. "Change of plans. We're going to war." The next 48 hours saw Azure Horizon's corporate headquarters transformed into the command center for a full-scale internal investigation, personally spearheaded by David Walker. He bypassed the normal chain of command, assembling a small, loyal war room team in a secure conference room on the 50th floor. Mark Johnson, his head of legal; Jennifer Chen, the now recalled terminal manager who owed her career to David; and a quiet, unassuming man named Ben Carter, the head of internal audit, who was known for his ability to find needles in digital haystacks. "I don't want a report. I don't want a summary. I want everything," David commanded, pacing the room. "Every email sent by Thomas Vance, Michael Russo, and Susan Price for the last 6 months. Every performance review, every memo, every chat log. I want to see the phone records. For every manager involved in this premium suite integrity initiative, Ben, I want you to trace a digital footprint of this policy. From its conception to the moment those handcuffs clicked onto my son's wrists." Ben Carter, a man who preferred the company of servers to people, simply nodded and set to work. His fingers a blur across 3 different keyboards. The first domino to fall was the official memo. It was just as Susan Price had described. The language was sanitized, full of corporate jargon like proactive revenue safeguarding and non-traditional passenger verification. But the subtext was chillingly clear. It instructed ground staff to apply extra scrutiny to passengers in premium suites who did not fit the typical customer profile, a phrase so vague and subjective it was a clear invitation to profile. "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen," Mark Johnson muttered, reading the document with disgust. "Any half-decent lawyer would tear this apart. Who in their right mind would approve this?" The answer came an hour later. Ben Carter projected a document onto the main screen. It was a policy draft with a digital signature at the bottom. Michael Russo, Regional Manager, East Coast. But it was a comment history that told the real story. There were multiple edits and suggestions from a single source, T. Vance, Q. Vance had not only reviewed it, he had helped write it. One of his comments was particularly damning. "Let's be more direct with the managers in the rollout. They need to understand that we have to be aggressive in protecting the front of the ship. Appearances can be deceiving." "He's covering his tracks," David said, his voice low. "He had Russo sign off on it, so his own name isn't on the final policy. But he's the architect." While Ben dug into the digital trail, Jennifer Chen used her personal connections at Port Everglades to get the human side of the story. She spent hours on the phone with other boarding agents, luggage handlers, and supervisors. A disturbing pattern emerged. Over the past few months, Michael Russo had been holding mandatory meetings for all customer-facing staff. In these meetings, he relentlessly pushed the new directive. He used case studies of actual fraud to create a climate of fear and suspicion while simultaneously offering bonuses to agents who successfully identified fraudulent passengers. One boarding agent, a young woman named Maria, broke down on the phone with Jennifer. "We all knew what he meant by atypical," she confessed, her voice thick with shame. "He showed pictures of the fraudsters they caught, and they were almost always people of color. He told us a kid in a hoodie shouldn't be in suite 1201. He said it was our job to be the guardians of the suite." Susan, she was just drinking the Kool-Aid more than anyone else. She wanted that bonus. She thought she was doing what the company wanted. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just a memo. It was a campaign of indoctrination orchestrated by Russo and masterminded by Vance. They had created a culture where prejudice was not only permitted but incentivized. Susan Price wasn't a lone wolf. She was a soldier they had trained and unleashed. The final, crucial piece of evidence came from Ben Carter late on the second night. He had been cross-referencing company travel logs with stock market data, a long shot ordered by David, who had a hunch something was still missing. "I found it," Ben said, his voice tired but triumphant. He pointed to a complex chart on the screen. "Look here. This is Thomas Vance's travel schedule. The week before the last 3 major PR incidents: the Atlanta baggage meltdown, the Dallas catering failure, and the Port Everglades incident. He flew to each of those cities for regional performance reviews. Standard stuff. But look at this, he overlaid another data set. This is options trading data for Azure Horizon stock. On the day after each of Vance's visits, there was a significant spike in put options being purchased through a specific hedge fund, a firm called Orion Capital Partners. A put option is basically a bet that the stock price will go down. And after each incident, our stock did dip for a day or two before we recovered, David finished. Understanding immediately, he was profiting from the chaos he was creating. There's more, Ben said, typing furiously. Orion Capital Partners. I did some digging. The primary stakeholder, listed through to shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands, is Thomas Vance's wife. The room fell silent. This was no longer about corporate backstabbing or even systemic racism. This was fraud. This was market manipulation. Thomas Vance wasn't just trying to sabotage his boss. He was setting his own company on fire and selling tickets to watch it burn, all to seize power and enrich himself in the process. David Walker stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city lights. The anger he felt was now a cold, hard clarity. He had the emails. He had the testimony. He had the financial trail. He had the poison, the snake, and the motive. Mark, he said, turning back to the room. Cancel my schedule for tomorrow. Instead, call an emergency meeting of the full board of directors. Tell them to be prepared for a presentation on the operational and ethical integrity of our cruise line. And tell them the COO's attendance is mandatory. The trap had been discovered. Now it was time to spring one of his own. The emergency board meeting was convened in the same room where David had received the call about Liam 2 days earlier. The atmosphere, however, was starkly different. The usual collegial chatter was absent, replaced by a palpable tension. The 12 board members, a collection of seasoned industry titans and powerful investors, sat around the polished mahogany table, their faces grim and expectant. At one end sat David Walker, calm and composed. At the other, Thomas Vance, who had managed to feign a look of concerned professionalism, hiding the frantic anxiety churning in his gut. He believed he still controlled the narrative. He had spent the last day and a half working the phones, spinning his story to his allies on the board. This was a tragedy, yes, but it was a failure of David's lax management style. It was the predictable result of an employee culture that lacked discipline. He was ready to call for a vote of no confidence. David began the meeting without preamble. Good morning, he said, his voice even and steady. I have called you here today to discuss a fundamental cancer that has taken root in this company. 2 days ago, it resulted in my own son being wrongfully detained and handcuffed by port police, an action prompted by one of our employees. But this incident was not the disease. It was merely a symptom. He clicked a remote, and a large screen at the end of the room lit up. It was a picture of Liam, young, smiling, holding a trophy from a robotics competition. This is Liam Walker, my son, and this. The image changed to a still from a passenger's cell phone video. Blurry but unmistakable. Liam in handcuffs, head bowed, being led away by Officer Bryant. Is what happened to him at our gate? A murmur went through the room. Thomas Vance shook his head, a pantomime of sorrow. It's a disgrace, David, a complete failure of our ground staff training. As I've been saying, the story you've been telling, David cut him off, his eyes locking on his coup. Is that this was the act of a rogue employee? Susan Price, let's talk about her. The screen changed again, now displaying Susan Price's file. 15 years of service, 0 complaints until 6 months ago. Then a string of minor customer grievances, all related to aggressive questioning. What changed 6 months ago, Thomas? Thomas shifted in his seat. I'm not privy to the day-to-day performance of every boarding agent. No, David agreed. But you are privy to this. The premium suite integrity memo flashed onto the screen, with Thomas Vance's name clearly visible in the comment history. You helped write the policy that encouraged our staff to challenge passengers who didn't fit the profile. You created the environment for this to happen. Vance's face paled slightly. That's a gross misinterpretation. That was a revenue protection measure. Was it? David countered, his voice like ice. Or was it a tool to create chaos? Let's look at Atlanta. A timeline of the baggage handling disaster appeared. And Dallas, the catering failure. And now Port Everglades. 3 major PR hits in 3 of our biggest hubs. And what do they all have in common? He didn't wait for an answer. They all occurred in regions managed by supervisors you personally promoted, Thomas. And they all occurred within days of a performance review visit from you. This is absurd. Vance blustered, trying to rally. You're trying to deflect from your own lack of oversight by creating a conspiracy theory. It's not a theory when you have the receipts, David said calmly. The screen changed to the final, damning slide. It was a complex web of financial data showing Vance's travel, the timing of the incidents, the subsequent dips in Azure Horizon stock price, and the corresponding spikes in profits for a hedge fund named Orion Capital Partners. At the center of the web was a photo of Thomas Vance and his wife at a charity gala. Orion Capital Partners, David announced to the stunned board, a fund whose primary owner is your wife, Thomas. A fund that has made over $10 million in the last 6 months by shorting our stock, betting against our success just before a series of operational failures. That you were in a unique position to orchestrate. You weren't just trying to make me look bad. You were setting fire to your own house for the insurance money. The silence in the room was absolute. Vance was ashen, speechless. The web of his deceit was laid bare for everyone to see. He had been so clever, so careful. But he had underestimated David's resolve and the resources at his command. Robert Harrison, the chairman of the board, a man with a face like granite, finally spoke. His voice was heavy with disgust. Thomas, is this true? Vance opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. Get him out of here, Harrison commanded. Two security guards, who had been waiting discreetly outside, entered the room. The hard karma had arrived and it was brutal. Thomas Vance was not just fired, he was terminated with cause. A clause in his contract that nullified his multi-million-dollar severance package and stock options. He was escorted from the building with a cardboard box containing his desk plant and a paperweight, a public humiliation in front of the employees he once commanded. But that was just the beginning. David and the board directed the company's legal team to pursue him civilly for damages to the brand. A lawsuit that would aim to claw back every penny he had made. More devastatingly, all the evidence of the stock trading was turned over to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the U.S. Attorney's Office. His corporate sabotage had crossed the line into serious federal crime. The man who dreamed of being CEO was now facing the very real possibility of a prison sentence. For Michael Russo, the regional manager, the call came an hour later. He was fired, his career in the industry over. For Susan Price, the news was delivered by HR. Her employment was terminated, effective immediately, for gross violation of company policy and customer conduct standards. She was the first domino and the smallest piece of the puzzle. A pawn sacrificed in a game she never even knew she was playing. Her life was upended, her reputation destroyed, and she was left to grapple with the fact that her moment of prejudice had been encouraged and manipulated by the very people she trusted. That was her karma, the sickening knowledge of her own puppetry. The poison had been purged, but the wound to the company and to David's family remained. In the weeks that followed the boardroom execution, Azure Horizon was in a state of controlled turmoil. The story of the Port Everglades incident and the subsequent ousting of the coup had leaked to the press, and the company was facing a PR firestorm. The stock took a sharp, painful hit as investors reacted to the news of corporate malfeasance. Instead of hiding, David Walker met the crisis head-on. He held a press conference that was shockingly, brutally honest. He didn't use corporate platitudes or blame a few bad apples. He stood before the world and admitted his own company's failure. The events that took place at Port Everglades were not just a mistake. They were a result of a toxic, prejudiced policy that was allowed to fester within our corporate culture, he stated, his voice ringing with conviction. It was a policy that I, as CEO, failed to identify and stop. That failure is on me. My son was a victim in this case, but I am painfully aware that he was not the first, only the most high-profile. And I am here today to announce that he will be the last. He then laid out a sweeping, multi-million-dollar plan for reform. He announced a partnership with the NAACP to completely rewrite and audit all employee training protocols, focusing on implicit bias and de-escalation. He introduced the Liam Walker Initiative, a $10 million scholarship fund personally financed by him and his family, dedicated to helping underprivileged minority students pursue careers in the maritime industry. From naval engineering to management, he ended the press conference by looking directly into the cameras. To every guest who has ever felt unseen, unheard, or unwelcome on one of our ships. I offer my deepest, unreserved apology. We failed you. But I give you my word, we will do better. We will learn. And we will earn back your trust. It was a masterclass in crisis management. But it was more than that. It was genuine. The public, so used to hollow corporate apologies, responded. The story began to shift from one of corporate scandal to one of accountability and redemption. 3 months later, the terminal at Port Everglades felt different. At the Azure Horizon gates, new posters were displayed highlighting the company's commitment to diversity and respect. The training videos playing in the staff break rooms now featured modules co-designed by civil rights experts. The culture, slowly but surely, was beginning to change. Liam Walker stood once again at Gate B24, this time with his father by his side. They were on their way to the Caribbean, rebooking the trip that had been so violently interrupted. Liam watched as a young black family, looking flustered and confused, was approached by a new boarding agent. Instead of suspicion, the agent offered a warm smile. "Welcome to Azure Horizon," she said kindly. "Let me help you find where you need to go." David put a hand on Liam's shoulder. "It's a start," he said quietly. Liam nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. The humiliation of that day would never fully leave him, but it no longer defined him. He had seen the worst of a system, but he had also witnessed his father's unwavering resolve to fix it. He looked out the window at the massive ship waiting at the dock, not just as a passenger, but as someone who now understood the immense responsibility that came with the name on its hull. "I was thinking," Liam said, turning to his dad, "I want to apply for the Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering program at MIT. But I also want a minor in business ethics." A slow smile spread across David's face. It was the first time he had truly smiled in months. The experience hadn't broken his son. It had forged him. It had given him a purpose. The company's new ascent and his sons were just beginning. The story of Liam Walker is a stark reminder of how easily prejudice can be systemized, and how a single, quiet moment of injustice can expose a rot that goes all the way to the top. It wasn't just about a racist gate agent. It was about a corporate culture that allowed that racism to be weaponized for greed and power. The hard karma that found Thomas Vance wasn't just the loss of a job, but the complete dismantling of his life, a direct consequence of his own venomous schemes. But more importantly, this story is about the aftermath. It's about a father's love turning into a catalyst for profound institutional change. Azure Horizon's journey to redemption shows that it's never too late for a person or a company to confront its darkest failings and choose a better path. What do you think? Was the karma in this story fitting for the crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story as compelling as we did, please hit that like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more incredible real-life stories. Thank you for watching.